Ahlan wa sahlan. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to allow Maryam to do a brief introduction, and then I will continue from there.
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to today's session of the Ramadan Pioneer Series. It's an initiative of the Dubai Future Academy, the capacity building arm of the Dubai Future Foundation. I'm Maryam AlRaeesi, and I will be today's moderator. This is the 11th session of this Ramadan, and it's the 44th session for the entire Ramadan Pioneer Series. Before we start, I would like to tell you that you can voice your questions in the Q&A section at the control panel below. Today's topic is building community resilience in a world of social distancing. And today's guest speaker is Ahmed Bin Shabib. He graduated from the University of Oxford in the field of geography, and he is an urban geographer, also the cultural advisor to the Minister of State, His Excellency Zaki. We agreed, we had a discussion, and we thought that we want to make this a Q&A session, but then since there will be one speaker, and it would make more sense that the speaker presents his session, and then also we want to open the possibility of having questions with an audience, but also I would barge in if there's anything that I would like to ask as well. So I would like to hand this over back to Ahmed, and good luck.
Great. Right. So am I sharing at the moment? صح ولا لا? The presentation.
No.
Okay, great. Let me start by doing that.
Okay, now, yeah.
So, first of all, I would like to thank the Dubai Future Academy, the Dubai Future Foundation for inviting me. I feel very honored to be part of this. I'll begin by introducing who I am. My name is Ahmed Bin Shabib, and I work very closely with my brother Rashid. We are both urban geographers. We are interested in the intersection of people and cities. And most particularly, we're interested in how people who now constitute, or cities which now constitute more than 50% of the global's population, how they historically have enhanced well-being. And they continue to be these places that allow societies to come together and strengthen them within themselves. Our background has always been related around the idea of social sustainability within Dubai. We looked at this from an architectural perspective. To begin with, I'd like to introduce the topic briefly, although Maryam has kindly done that, but I think it's quite important to ask ourselves a set of questions. The first question is, what is the topic, building community resilience in a world of social sustainability, the world of social distancing? What does building mean? What does community mean? What does resilience mean? And what does a world of social distancing mean? Why is this topic important today? And what are the future possibilities beyond a post-COVID world? And we've structured this conversation in two ways. One is a dialogical conversation, where we would like to examine this topic through conversations and definitions before we attempt to address them and answer them. And the second aspect is a dialectical one, where we will look at examples of how communities were built throughout societies, how communities have been built within our region, within our city. And then from a dialectical perspective, try to examine or chart a path forward. I think a point that I'd like to make is that communities is built on the fundamental idea of rituals, repetitive experiences that bring us together, where we extract value from common experiences and build communities. So to begin with, what is the word community? And I've put this picture of Johnson of making a staircase. And the idea that humanity and human beings are cooperative species. The idea that we all fundamentally come from this word of commune, of community. And even the idea of what we have here, al-majalis. Before I gave this discussion a couple of days ago, I was speaking to my grandfather, and he was saying that one of the other words for al-majalis was al-maramis. And the idea that communication is a very strong root of the idea of a community. And the second is the idea of resilience. What does resilience mean? And you're looking at a picture of a person called Yifu Tuan, who wrote a book called Space and Place. And if you think about, cities and spaces within cities are just general, physical environments. But what makes a space a place? Growing up, for me, in Dubai, for example, there were many spaces in the city. But I know that Sindibad in AlRaeesi Center was a place. Leisureland was a place. Park and Shop was a place. Hadiqat al-Safa was a place. My mother's dining room was a place. All of these environments really made us feel like our repetitive experiences within those physical environments made us extract an experience that converted that space to place. But a little bit beyond these physical spaces, you have things called social networks. Today we understand social networks to be these environments that are digital or virtual. But when we were younger, we would go to a physical location, and that was our social network. And it is in those environments where we would meet friends on a weekly basis, where older gentlemen would sit together in front of the mosque after evening prayer, where we strengthen community bonds. And similar to how if we want to know the health of our economy, we would look at the market's capital, and we would look at the financial markets. Our social community resilience is based on our social capital. And the social capital is always built on the rituals and the repetitive experiences that don't exist in spaces, but exist within places within our city. I'll give you two examples of this. What you're looking at is Japanese fire trucks after Fukushima's earthquake. And on the right, you have this concept called Sudan, which is a campaign. It was a public campaign, but also it was a movement within Japan that told people that you have to reduce the number of light bulbs that you have in the house. You have to reduce your electricity consumption, because we all need to come together as a community and to be able to be resilient to overcome the drop in energy as a result of the nuclear power plants going offline. And there's a lot of countries that probably face similar natural disasters, but do not overcome these disasters like Japan has. And a question is why has Japan successfully overcome this challenge, whereas others have not? And I think the secret lies in the strength of the community. And I've witnessed this personally in Dubai growing up. When Dubai Cares was launched, the target was, almost unachievable. And the amount of money that was generated within such a short period of time, a lot of people from the Dubai community came and donated money. It was the Indian community, the Arab community, the Western community, the national, community. All of Dubai and all of the UAE came together, and they gave funding. And I know that Tariq gave a talk earlier on, but they brought in money, and this was as a result of the community coming together. But also, it wasn't surprising for me that Dubai Cares was able to achieve their target and generate revenue and to be able to set a goal so high. It's because I think Dubai throughout history has, from Deira to Shindaga to Baradbay, the communities were so resilient and interconnected to each other that they were able to constantly overcome challenges. And I think, the city has a resilient community, and it permeates even throughout the contemporary times we're facing. And so while we're trying to answer this question of building community resilience in a world of social distancing, let us ask ourselves the question, how has the impact of the virus affected the concept of a community? And if you look at communities and this idea of togetherness, people have been writing about this for centuries. Ibn Khaldun's Al-Muqaddimah wrote about sedentary to Bedouin population meeting each other and formulating the first urban environments. This continues today in Richard Sennett's book, Together, where he talks about cooperation and rituals. So this idea of working together is important, but this idea of social distancing has put under threat the concept of togetherness. And this idea of togetherness takes place in physical environments, like I had said earlier. But a more important question is, what happens in social gatherings? And these social gatherings are mostly reflected in physical environments. I gave the example of my mother's dining room, but I would like to give other public examples, the public majlis or the public tea house, where people would sit together and in a lot of instances knowing each other, but in most of the cases did not know each other. And it's through sitting together where barriers have broken down, where the idea of togetherness is not about cooperation to achieve a specific outcome, but cooperation for the sake of cooperation, as we are social creatures. And I remember a story I had heard of Emirati businessmen going to Japan earlier on. And they were saying that the Emirati businessmen were sitting with Japanese businessmen, and for the first 5 or 10 minutes would say almost nothing. And I think that's very powerful because, the idea of being together does not necessarily mean talking, but there's power in silence and power in the statement that I am here and that I am with you and we are together. But also, we are at a crossroads. I put this picture in a sartorial manner of the drive-through cinema. But there's uncertainty in the future. We don't know whether we'd have to be in pods to go to cinemas. I mean, I know we will overcome this challenge, but in the immediate future, we live in a time of uncertainty. And it's in this time of uncertainty where I believe it's better for us to examine what did we do in the past successfully, and how can we use those learnings in the present and in these current circumstances. And so, we've just discussed dialogically the idea of community resilience and the idea of social distancing. But I'd like to talk about it from a dialectical perspective. And dialectically, what I'd like to talk about is tools and the idea of histography, of what has been done previously to build communities locally and globally. And what are we doing? What is happening in a post-COVID world? And where are the opportunities? So if we look at old Dubai, you're looking at the Holy Trinity Church in Oud Metha, this fantastic modernist architectural structure that was representative of a community that existed in Dubai in their own way. And this was not only limited to one specific religious group, but it also existed in the Hindu temple Shiva and Krishna in 1958. So communities within Dubai had physical environments to come together. And throughout history, from 1958 all the way up to the present, with the reconstruction and the building of the Norwegian church in the late 70s, and the continuous creation of these civic and social spaces. But it wasn't just about physical spaces, it was about celebrations. Growing up in Dubai, I remember Diwali fireworks, Eid, and Christmas. So the idea that not only every community had their own church or temple, but that communities came together and blended with each other, that from a local perspective, from a local context, really had a strong community resilience. And this is evident for me because today I see second or third generation kids that have grown up in Dubai go back to the UK, go back to Korea, go back to the US. And after a while, they want to come back to Dubai. And I think the reason why they want to come back is not because of the economic opportunity. It goes beyond that. There's a social value that they have extracted from the memories of the spaces and the places that they existed in. But cities are engines for social interactions. They're the engines that create spaces where we can create places, and they are the most in terms of tolerance because of the different walks of life that exist there. One of the greatest contemporary thinkers of this is Jan Gehl. He wrote Cities for People. He's from Denmark. He is most famously known for two cases, but this one is the latter one, where he took Times Square and he took out all the cars and put public seating so people can sit with each other. And although this is not reflective of New York's, Williamsburg, Lower East Side, or wherever it is in New York, where communities do sit together, it's a great public statement to say that the person comes first, and that people coming together in central and public spaces is where we feel the beginning of starting communities are. And if you look back in history, the first spaces that were like this are the marketplaces, the souk. And it's where the souk was where public spaces first flourished, where they're ancient Rome or al-Qasba in the Arab world. The second example is Copenhagen. And Jan Gehl is also one of the people who had started the cycling movement in Denmark, which has now moved on to Amsterdam and made cycling such an important or an intrinsic mode of transportation for people globally, and have brought people together. If anyone has been to Copenhagen, on the right-hand side, over here, there's a place called Royal Copenhagen. They sell fantastic coffee cups, which is highly recommended. And thirdly, designed by Bjarke Engels, who the Dubai Future Foundation know quite well. They've worked with them on the Mars mission space, which is in process. The Super Kill, also in Denmark, designed by Bjarke Engels. And this idea of converting a place where communities can be built. So you have the idea of migrants coming to Europe, coming to Scandinavia and settling in Scandinavia. And a lot of these migrants have come from North Africa and they're Muslim, but they come to a very Western environment. But this idea of introducing, in a very simple term, a Moroccan fountain with mosaic, or al-hilal as a seating, or as a lighting symbol. It allows the individual to feel like they have a sense of ownership in this public space. And I think these are very interesting ways from initially a Dubai perspective, how we created communities, and globally right now, how we're building communities. But now let's move on to this idea of the coronification of our current environment, or this idea that we are now in this world of corona, and how are we responding to it? The idea of teleoconnectivity, of being connected from long distance, from far distances, has always been thought about in history. George Simmel here is a sociologist, urban sociologist, where he predicted, in the early 20th century, that people will begin connecting with each other from a distance, whether that is coming by modes of transportation or being together through some virtual environment. But the picture on the right is where we find ourselves more and more in today's world. And I think this is not necessarily a negative thing. I think, you know, the virtual environments, Zoom is becoming a place. You know, it's no longer just a virtual space. I'm finding with time that these environments are now creating forms of virtual places. And they will never overtake the importance of physically being together. But the idea of building communities virtually is important. I find myself now meeting people that I have put off for years, saying when I go to Berlin, I'll meet this person, or when I'll go to Singapore, I'll meet this person. I find myself more connecting with them today than I have if I had put it on the back burner for a long time. So I feel like there's something here, and technologies that we were friends with before, working from a distance, studying from a distance, today we're essentially married to. And so we have to understand the role of this idea of technology in our day-to-day life. The second question is the concept of cities. The idea that historically we want to move to cities because of economic opportunity. Today, cities are in question. Can cities continue to function in this manner as the way we're looking at this picture, by being close together? Are the restrictions that we will put in place will hinder all the reasons for actually going to the city? And so there have been questions to the alternative of this idea of the countryside. This is an exhibition put up by Ram Koolhaas at OMA and their research arm, AMO, about the future of the world, arguing that the countryside makes more sense because you know, we don't need to be in cities to serendipitously bump into people that we have not met with before. This idea of incidental interactions, but that the virtual world affords us these forms of interactions. But also on the other hand, it allows us to grow our own vegetables. It allows us to farm our own bees. So you get the best of both worlds, the humanistic element, but also be connected to the rest of the world. So this idea in this idea of social distancing, we're now putting into question the concept of the city. But taking a step forward and looking at Dubai, which has always been a dynamic city, which has always been a city that is under stress and under challenge and always forced to innovate itself. And the reason why it's been able to innovate itself is because it has the governance flexibility and it always takes the risk. And it does this through three cycles. One is there's a change that's taking place, similar to the change we're currently going through. Another aspect is an opportunity is identified. And the third is the delivery of that opportunity that's identified. And so the picture that you're looking at is the dredging of the Dubai Creek, where an opportunity of saying we would like to build a port economy. And because we have a micro port economy on the Dubai Creek, Dubai takes that idea, it takes it from Dubai Creek to Port Rashid, to Jebel Ali Port, to Dubai Airport, and builds the largest air and ocean port network that exists around the world. That's taking the opportunity and identifying it through change and delivering through the ideas of products. A second example is the tourism economy. The idea that Dubai brings in so many people through Emirates Airlines. The weather is great, a majority amount of the year. And so there's a change that's taking place. We need to diversify our income from energy based. An opportunity exists. And then the complete delivery, Jumeirah International. Today you have La Mer, City Walk, downtown Dubai. All of these, tourism attractions that are built as a result of creating a tourism economy. And another economy is the knowledge economy. This idea of Internet City being built in 91, the DIFC, Dubai Design District, the idea that we need to create a service-based knowledge economy to attract a specific category of society that we would like for them to participate in our economy. And creating this knowledge economy has been successful in many ways, whether they're specialized spaces as we have seen, or whether Dubai Design District, for example, is the latest one. And so today we're looking at the future economy. We are now in the process, Dubai is in the process of building the future economy. Sheikh Mohammed had recently said that he had started that the smart government was started over a decade ago. This idea that we feel that there is change coming, that there is an opportunity to own the future or to take part in the future economy, similar to how we manage Dubai ports, but now we're exporting the concept of Dubai ports and managing Dubai ports globally. There exists the idea of owning the future economy. And the reason why I've made this argument of the future economy is to ask ourselves a set of questions today about building community resilience. Is today we're in a position where social distancing has accelerated the future economy. This idea that we can build virtual places online, the idea that we can introduce touch technology, where we can introduce individual mobility, drone technology, all of these future economy tools, instruments that would bring us together have now a justifiable reason to be expedited. But this situation we're in will pass within a year, within 2 years, or whether by Expo we will completely be back to normal. But we need to ask ourselves a series of long-term and short-term questions. But ask ourselves, how can we utilize this as an opportunity to change our behavior and mannerism, to respond to build stronger and more resilient communities? And this is where the opportunity, I believe, exists for us. So I think I will pause at that as a general presentation and maybe open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. It was a very interesting session. Now, there are a few questions that some of our viewers would like to ask. There's a question from...
Wait, should I remove the screen share? Do you think, or will I just?
Yeah, I think it's fine if you remove it.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So there's a question from Maryam al-Blushi. The question is, how cities can become more resilient to future crises?
I think it's there's two types of questions. There's two types of answers when it comes down to trying to understand the idea of the future, to try to predict the future. One way is to say we believe this is going to happen because of the past, and another way is to try to understand how the future, how technologies that exist today can be utilized to try to create a better future. But I think, irrespective about what the future may look like, I think communities are built physically through repetitive rituals. And I think, if we go back 1 or 2 generations, the idea of al-Farij, with the Khan اللي في الفريج, with the idea of يرانا كانوا أهلنا ونعرفهم, our neighbors were people we knew intimately, and we know them would strengthen our communities. And there was an experiment that took place, I don't know whether it was Taiwan or Hong Kong, where it was called the experiment of lend your neighbor money. And the experiment goes as follows. It says, if a neighbor would ask to borrow money from his other neighbor, if a person would ask to borrow money from his neighbor, how much money would that neighbor give him? And so by conducting this experiment, they were able to understand how strong communities were based on trust, and the idea that trust is a strong underpinning for people to be able, although this is an economic explanation, to answer the question in a very simple way, to build a future resilient community, we need to start now looking at how we can strengthen communities to build more trust. And they are in our physical spaces, in our neighborhoods, in our public spaces.
Right. Okay. Moving on to the second question. There's a question from Khulud. It says, how can we manage physical distancing when we return to our office or visit malls?
I think, like I said, I think that's more of a DHA kind of a question. I think that's more a technical question of how will you be able to go to most. But to answer the question in a different way, I think, for example, creating predictable patterns of socializing is an important process for you to attract different sets of people that can meet each other. So for example, the concept of al-milas happens once a week or daily or whatever it may be. We've been running this thing called the fireplace, where we conduct it throughout the winter months. And it takes place every Thursday. And everyone knows that if it's a Thursday and it's winter, you can come to the fireplace. And you can meet different sets of people, and mostly from the design and art community. And we get between 20 or 15 people per week. But we've continued this virtually on Zoom.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, it was awkward because when you sit in a public forum, different people have different conversations. Whereas when you have a conversation similar to this, it's a uniform type of conversation which everyone takes place in. But after a while, I realized that more and more people began to come, and the idea of maintaining that social link is good enough until things get back to normal. Right. And so to answer the question is that when you do go back to the workplace, the reason why it's going to be a shock for you is most likely you haven't been maintaining some form of pattern or rhythm with your colleagues, where it's once a week or a daily call. That's not necessarily just about a transactional call, but just about engaging with them so you know where they are at and you can get their forms of feedback.
There's another question from Abdullah Brady. It's about urban planning. When it comes to urban planning, what would the future look like, let's say, if the social distancing measures stay for about 5 years?
I think, urban planning is an amazing thing because it's urban planning historically was very, it's called urban morphology, which basically means that cities naturally evolve as they add a small street to each other. They start with a small marketplace or a well or a creek, and then you begin, evolving naturally. I would say, during the cholera or the malaria outbreak in Dubai, social distancing was in place for a very long time. But then we overcame it. I have no doubt that we will overcome this, and it's, people keep calling it a black swan event, although I think I find the word black and swan very weird to put together, but I do believe that it is a once in a lifetime event. And although there are possibilities that it might repeat, I think we are we're more prepared for it. But if you're interested in knowing about the future of how cities will look like, I highly recommend, sci-fi movies. You know, sci-fi movies are very, they ingrain within urban planners today what ideas of the future could look like. Um, you know, Blade Runner is an excellent example. Metropolis is a historical example. These are all great examples of you trying to understand what the future possibly look like, could possibly look like. But I think what I find more interesting is not what the future could look like, but how can we take the future and make it happen today? Like, how can we make this a more normalized experience? Like, we've had this technology for years, but we never needed to take it as seriously as we have today. You know, I see no more important use for drones ever than I do see them for today. And so I would say the future of urban environments from an extreme present perspective, I would argue that to look at technologies that are semi-deployable and make them full. Like, for example, when the iPhone was first launched, the idea of a touch screen on an iPhone was always breaking down. You had them with different phones, but the touch wasn't responsive, the zoom wasn't responsive. But then Apple came and they standardized it, and then everyone else standardized it. I feel like we're at that point where all this technology is at this like lagging, and it just needs someone to come and just say, this is the future economy, and deploy it.
Yeah. There's also a question about towers from James. Will COVID push people away from tower blocks to low-rise communities with gardens?
I would highly recommend that that he reads. There's an architectural movement in Japan called metabolism. I'm sure he'll know it or he's heard of it. And I'm going to share a screen. I'm going to be quite casual with the way I do things here.
Yeah.
So these are the original. Can you see this browser?
Yeah.
Okay. These are they're called the towers in the sky. Proposal for Shibuya in Japan. And the argument for this is that the building can expand and contract according to economic cycles. And this is a Nakigen where you would have a capsule tower. And essentially, if you wanted to move from one city to another, you'd sit in this capsule, or they'd move your capsule from one place to another. And so, although there are arguments to say that we need less density, his argument is, do we need more density or less density? And I think the argument is that having less density reduces interaction, reduces the risk of infections, and might be standardized compared to high-rise towers.
Right.
But in the 1970s, there were arguments that high-rise towers are effectively safer because you're in isolated pods. So that seems more futuristic in the 1960s than low-rise towers that we have today.
All right, thank you. Maybe you can take one more question and then we can wrap it up. There's a nice question to end it. What lessons do you take out of the COVID pandemic to design future cities?
What lessons can I take from the COVID pandemic to design future cities? You know, I think there's short-term reactions and long-term movements, right? Like a short-term reaction is to say, let's begin putting isolation measures in place so that if a pandemic does exist, it doesn't spread so quickly, right? Or let's put processes in place so that I think that's a very short-term response. I think a long-term better strategy is to try to understand why in the first place did infections take place? This idea that we have urban density and as a consequence of this, the susceptibility of viral infections is high, but simultaneously, should we not try, because we have all of this wonderful land that exists in our country, in our city, and all this amazing technology where we can grow things and extract energy from the sun, why can't we start looking at longer term movements that does not necessarily isolate ourselves from being in cities, but to start to think about, communities that are in many ways small villages,
Yeah.
that are completely self-sufficient, but also enable us, to think I mean, this idea of utopic cities is something that everyone thinks about, and everyone wants to build the next city and the next city. But I think we don't need to build cities. I think we could build a small town.
Yeah.
This idea of a townscape that's self-sufficient, and we can grow our own vegetables. But still, do this. Connect with 100 people on Zoom to give a talk about community resilience.
So we have someone who would like to enter the conversation. Wasim, I'm just gonna allow the person to enter.
مرحبا وسيم. Wissam.
Is it Wissam? Sorry, Wissam.
Hi, how are you? With you, Dr. Wissam, Faculty of Education, Alexandria University. Thanks for your invitation and magnificent lecture for your both, Dr. Ahmed, Dr. Maryam. And Ramadan Kareem. I want to ask you about how we can a safety setting in the culture. There is a global and there's is it clear?
الحين it's clear.
Oh, okay. What I want to say is there is a global culture and there is local culture. What happened today is mixing between the global culture and the local culture, and this influence on or there is impact on the safety and the health of the citizens. We can say in that happened in America, that happened in Emirates, that happened in Egypt. So how we can establish a system or environment in safety mode, and we can also that what inhabit or didn't affect in.
I think Maryam,
the virus on the citizens of the world. We can a system or
Okay, مشكور Dr. Wissam. I think, from what I caught in the, you're a little bit choppy, but you're a little bit unclear, but I think from the two general arguments, one is there's a global-local argument. The idea that it's the mixing between the global and the local that has made this, that has caused this potential problem. And I think the second idea is this concept of a safety net in response to this pandemic. And I think although I do, argue for the idea of localism, go and build a nice town outside the city, I am a complete globalist. I think my city is a global city, and I think we have managed to create an excellent case study for future global cities. And I think trying to fight globalization is like pushing the ocean back with a broom. It's impossible. There's just too much against you. But I as well believe that pandemics, economic cycles, forms of instability are always going to be detrimental to economic and social momentum. Because as we progress economically and socially, there's always going to be hindrances that will stop us from this progression. But I always believe that these elements are like how healthy your immunity is. And although I'm using this example, but if you think of a community as a biological creature, how strong is its immunity? For example, from external influences. If our communities, we are inoculated and, we know each other, we don't have, hatred, we have stronger understanding, and although to some extent it's too utopic to think like this, but if we have a very strong understanding that we are one society and we're on the same boat and we have to cooperate with each other and we have to work well together, we're different, but we're on the same boat, and that this is repeated through constant understanding, then we can build communities. And I think no matter what happens, whether there's the 2008 economic bubble or 2020 coronavirus, or the 1915 Spanish flu, or even Dubai's 1960 not essentially discovering, their vast wealth of oil, or like its idea of getting out of dependency of oil and overcoming that. And I think the only way to overcome that is if there is a strong sense of community and not through rejecting globalization.
We have one last word from one of our attendees, Khalfan Bilhol. He's our CEO of the Dubai Future Foundation.
أهلا.
أبو شهاب السلام عليكم كيف حالك؟ I had to jump in, no question. I just wanted to thank you, and I have to admit I was on my treadmill while listening to you, and it made me realize how part of what you were saying, that life is going to change and there will be efficiencies, and I think I enjoyed every bit of your session صراحة while I was burning calories. So I think there's less excuse now for people not to stay fit, and I think obviously in informal discussions and formal cabinet meetings, if you will, or board meetings, that's a different case. Everyone needs to stay formal. But in sessions like this, where unfortunately the presenter and the moderator maybe should stay formal, but the audience, it opens up it opens up the opportunity for many people to jump in and multitask, whether someone is cooking or listening to something very useful, or someone on a treadmill. And I think it made those kind of sessions, and those are some kind of pros of having those interactive sessions happen in convenient times, of course, as well. Nothing from my end, صراحة. I learned a lot today, and Bushab is a fellow Bostonian that I've known for such a long time, who I've enjoyed every conversation. He's an athlete himself, an amazing basketball player, but most importantly, an amazing human being, which I always wish him the best. Thank you for taking the time for joining us at the Future Academy Pioneer Series. Maryam, you've done great, mashallah, in moderating the session, so thanks to you as well.
مشكور Khalfan. Thank you guys for inviting me. والله.
Allah يوفقك. مشكور يا أبو شاب. Thank you, Maryam.
Thank you. So I think this is a wrap up. Thank you so much for the session. It was very interesting, and thank you for everyone who attended. From our attendees, the CEO, Khalfan Bilhol, and His Excellency Umar Al-Ulama. I hope everyone learned something from the session, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you, Ahmed. Have a great day.